So, welcome to one of the first recordings for 2021 on the SDR DiscoCall podcast. I'm your host, Neil Buyan, and today we've got a very special guest from a special friend, Sir Addison. If you're watching or listening in, thank you for introducing to me to this character that we have today. We have Joshua Brown. Joshua, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, Neil. How are you doing?
I'm doing super. All the better for speaking and connecting with you. So Joshua, for the listeners that are listening, or perhaps the people that are watching this show, could you please tell us, who are you, where in the world are you from, and currently where are you at?
I can do that. My name is Joshua Brown. I am based out in the Bay Area of California, Oakland to be specific.
Thank you very much. And where are you at in terms of work, and what do you do, sir?
Oh, yeah, I should have answered that in the first question. I am an outbound sales development manager at Pantheon Platform.
Thank you very much. And at a super high level, what does Pantheon do for the guys that may want to know?
They should want to know. We're a website operations platform, and we empower your marketing and development teams to take control of your website. Simply put, we make the internet and open source irresistible.
Ooh, open source irresistible. I like that. So obviously, guests and listeners for the show, this is a bit of a different twist because, as mentioned, this is a podcast for SDRs, and we normally have SDR guests. And this is one of our first SDR managers, and hopefully not the last. And when Addison, our mutual friend, said, "Hey Neil, there's this guy Joshua, you need to connect with him. He's got such a cool story." I was like, "Addison, but he's an SDR manager." He's like, no, you need to connect with him. So I said, okay, I'll give it a go. And Joshua, I was speechless. We had a well over an hour conversation back in 2020. And I was just like, yeah, I need to get this guy on the show 100% because you've got an inspirational story, and I'm looking forward for you sharing that with everybody today. And the one thing that kind of caught my eye when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, I saw SDR manager, but then I saw hype man, and I was just like, okay, hype man. Could you help us understand what do you mean by hype man for you?
Well, Neil, you're making it pretty difficult for me because now I need to live up to this hype. So what when you're in sales development, hype is so important. Bringing a positive attitude to the job every single day is essential. And my job as a manager is to make sure all those who are working with me, all my colleagues, are hyped up as well as hyping up myself to get hyped.
Couldn't put it better myself, man. And you definitely hyped me, and hopefully you bring that hype beast to this show. But as mentioned, I was checking out your LinkedIn, and I remember seeing things such as Bake Sale Betty, Teacher Aid, Outward in Birkwood School, co-founder for Open Circle LLC, an enterprise SDR at the company that I always struggle to say. Help me out here.
Conversica.
Thank you very much. And then obviously coming to Pantheon, being an SDR team lead, and now as a manager. Could you kind of walk us through that journey from Bake Sale Betty to kind of getting to Pantheon?
I can definitely do that. So we all have those first jobs in high school. Bake Sale Betty was that for me. I was bagging sandwiches, bagging cookies. Bake Sale Betty is actually this pretty great bakery in Oakland. And so it's a pretty high intense job. It wasn't that slow type of bakery that people might typically have that exposure to. I was on it. The way sales SDRs are sort of cranking calls and tossing out emails, I was doing that, but with sandwiches. So high intensity in high school, just trying to make a buck. And then I think you mentioned after that, Open Circle. Open Circle was once I was in college. I was actually dealing with a good amount of social anxiety. And I'll go into that in a bit. And my friend and I actually decided to create a social engagement platform for universities. So that was a great stint of being an entrepreneur. And then eventually I got a stellar opportunity at Conversica. Addison took a leap of faith on me and was able to sort of branch out into the corporate world. And then, the rest is kind of history. Did a great job in sales development, and then went over to Pantheon as a manager.
I absolutely love it. And obviously, just for the watchers and listeners, so we're right in January 2021 right now. And I was just wondering, with Addison, pre-corona, have you ever got into the car with that dude before? Have you ever
Oh,
been driven by Addison?
I have been driven by Addison. I remember it was like maybe my second week at Conversco working with him, and we were driving to pick up burritos. And never have I felt more sort of competitive just to go pick up lunch. I felt like I was in a race car, and I guess we needed to get back to the office because he was bending corners and speeding on the freeway just to get those burritos. But I'm glad it was an experience. And it was very controlled, so I didn't feel unsafe, but it was definitely new for me.
I absolutely love it. So, guys listening in and watching in, Addison is somebody that I used to be an SDR with in my first startup at Zora. He owns his own race car business, and yeah, I've got in a car with Addison once, and that is the last time because it scared the bejesus out of me. But I'm glad to hear that you survived and you're here on the show today, so thanks for that. So obviously, yeah, you've had that journey of kind of working in that retail sort of like commercial food experience, and then going through to kind of start up your own business and entrepreneurial life. You met Addison. He kind of betted on you, and it kind of paid off. And you guys are now together at Pantheon as well. But obviously, when we connected, what I understood with you, Joshua, is that you've had somewhat of a athletic career, and this was way before thinking about sales. And it was quite awe-inspiring to listen. Rather than me kind of like grab back at what we were talking about, could you kind of like walk us through from like when it was at high school and in the baseball era, kind of what happened there?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, to start off, like never did I envision getting into like the corporate life. That just wasn't really in the cards for me. Growing up, I was a pretty decent baseball player. And I had, very high hopes and expectations to, really take that professionally. And so, throughout, middle school, I remember I was playing 90 games a summer in travel ball. And then come high school, was really having breakout years and getting, great exposure to colleges and professional teams. And that was my life. That was my identity. And everything was sort of trucking along quite well. However, when I was actually in middle school, I was actually younger than middle school. I was diagnosed with scoliosis. So my spine had a curve to it. And it was progressively getting worse. However, I was in a back brace. So I had to wear that 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the only time I would take it off was to play baseball. So like that kind of fueled the passion even more because that was what brought me freedom. And then eventually my junior year of high school, I was growing a ton. And with that came an even worse curve to my spine. And it eventually got to the point where my doctors told me that I need to get an operation. And it completely fused my spine. So that was kind of when everything just stopped. I was, once again, I was doing fantastic with baseball, and then this was a massive roadblock for me. So I had my first back surgery, fuse pretty much about 3/4 of it. And, I think initially they put in 22 screws and 2 titanium rods to keep it straight.
So 22 singular screws into your back and then 2 rods?
Yeah.
What was going through your mind when they're saying that many screws into your back?
I was mentally preparing for it, that it was eventually going to happen potentially. They told me all along that the whole bracing process isn't kind of, it has some flaws to it. And, you still run the risk of needing to get an operation, but I was willing to do any preventative things to make sure I didn't need the operation. When they told me I needed to get the surgery, I remember, sitting in the doctor's office and I just started bawling and I was with my mother and kind of reality was setting in that I wasn't going to, I already really wasn't normal being the kid with the back brace. But I had baseball to make me feel grounded. I had baseball to make me feel beautiful, if you will.
Hmm.
And I knew that things were going to kind of have a wrench in the plan. So ultimately, had to go through with the surgery, um, and I was obsessed with just getting back at it. Recovery for the surgery is typically about a year.
Mm.
You spend a significant amount of time in the hospital, and then they send you home, and the rest of the year you just have to get better. Um, well, I couldn't sit with that. Like just me being hyperactive, me just yearning to get back to the field. I remember I started exercising. You're up all day long,
Yeah.
because like your sleep patterns off. And I remember being up, during the middle of the night. Everyone's asleep in the house, and I would start doing push-ups and sit-ups, like just trying to do everything I could to feel normal again.
Uh, And so, if I get this right, so you've had this surgery, you're in recovery, you're in and out of hospital. Like you said, you're yearning to get back to your passion of baseball, but obviously you're having to let this body heal a bit. But what, you start working out? Like, what was the advice on the doctors on that?
Well, doctors were saying just sit tight. But the naive 16, 17-year old thinks you're absolutely invincible.
Mm.
So I can't really listen to that. I hear it, but I'm not going to listen to it. So I kind of start going on to my own agenda. Lo and behold, that wasn't the greatest decision. I ended up breaking a screw in one of my lower vertebrae. Yeah, I go in for like a 4-month checkup, and they're like, "Hey, so a screw's broken. We need to do emergency surgery on that, because if the
No
screw
way.
was to, sort of shift around a little bit more, like that could very well paralyze you." And
Jeez.
and
And what when you, so like you were doing all these workouts, and you go in for like your 4 month check in, they're like, hey, Joshua, there's something wrong here, and it could have, like you said, it could have paralyzed you. What was going through your mind at that point when they told you that?
once again, the naive 17-year-old hears that, and isn't too concerned. I remember thinking like, okay, the first surgery was difficult. Very mentally taxing, and like I
Mm.
don't go into that all too often. I'll try to open up a little bit, but it's mentally taxing. While everyone else is kind of living out their teenage years, that's when everyone gets licenses and are sort of opening up into who they are socially. I was stuck needing to worry about my health, and what
Mm.
16, 17-year-old teenager wants to worry about their health. Um, and so when I heard that I was going to need to go into the operation room again, I was I was more concerned about my mental well-being, than I necessarily was about my physical well-being. Um, at that point, I still wasn't willing to let um, baseball be out of the question. My athletic career. Um, but I knew that this was going to take a major, it was going to make a major impact on what that future
Mm.
looked like. And so that was sobering.
So when you say like you was more concerned for like your mental health compared to like your physical health, could you kind of like elaborate a bit? Like what were you aiming to do?
Um, well, I mean, mentally, I just knew, the first go around, and still, I was actually in, a good amount of, like a good bout of depression. Um, and I knew that kind of with the idea of having this other surgery looming over my head, like it was only going to get worse.
Mm.
Um, and once again, like, my trajectory was just off. It had been, thrown off with the first surgery. I thought doing push-ups and sit-ups was going to make me healthier, ended up backfiring. Um, and then, here comes the second operation. And that one, it wasn't as extensive as the first one. They added 6 screws to my back and added about probably 6 inches of to those initial 2 rods.
Mm.
Um, but mentally, it was draining. And just for context, these surgeries are like 16 hours. They're absurdly long, and so I'll be out in anesthesia for like a whole day.
Mm.
And my parents are just waiting. They're getting updates here and there. So honestly, mom, papa, shout out to you. That must have been really taxing for you as well. Uh,
100%.
yes. Um, but when I was, recovering from that, that was brutal, because I already kind of wasn't in the shape I needed to be in. And then I got another surgery, and I knew there was going to be even more time. And this time I was going to need to listen to doctors a little bit better than I previously had.
Yeah.
Yeah, so wasn't listening to my advice anymore. And, I remember, going back to school. I would go to school, after recovery. I would go to school for like 3 hours a day. I would get kind of like essential classes out of the way, and then I'd be in school from like 8:30 till like 11 every day, just so I can get my essential classes in, and then I would go home and rest up. So once again, social exposure zero. I was tapped out while I was at school, and I remember, consistently my car was parked right near the baseball field, and still seeing the baseball field and looking at the freshly cut grass and getting that aroma and just and it was
Must
beating
have
me
been
up.
torture.
Oh yeah, it was beating me up. It just
Mm.
that became more and more difficult. Um, and then, as I mentioned, like the social anxiety, the depression kind of grew and grew.
Mm.
Um, and so
And
that was, go ahead.
so it's just it's making me think. So obviously this was years ago, but in the current world that we're in, like in the UK at the moment, we've gone into another lockdown. I know things are affected again in the US, but it reminds you of kind of like what we're going through right now. Like social interaction is limited. I can look out of my window from my apartment at the moment. There's things I can't go do. I can't go see. Yeah, I can't even go see my family members at the moment. But like you're saying, you were going into school for short, sharp bursts of time, and then coming back to this, well, lockdown. Like, how was you handling that?
Yeah, I think I was trying to keep myself busy. I really discovered a lot of like music during that time. I remember like music was a great passion of mine. I had, and this is kind of when I really started developing like a tight knit circle of friends.
Hmm.
I went from being this like big social extrovert to very introverted and having like a select few of individuals I felt like I could really call on if needed.
Hmm.
Um, and I think developing that small circle was what allowed me to still remain healthy. Like to this day, I'm very much like a tight knit individual. People might think I'm extroverted, and I can turn on when needed.
Yeah.
But ideally, I'm a much more reserved individual. I have my dog, I have my significant other. I love, being in communication with my family. But like you said, like you can't even visit your family these days.
Yeah.
But I think having like your small like social circle is essential for then and now, and that's something that I think I've brought with me.
Well, it kind of gave you, in essence, kind of like some early training to prepare for now. So it paid dividends to an extent. And I
Yeah.
remember, like, after this period, like, you were going through this recovery, but then you had this stint of going back to college. What happened at this point, like with sports and baseball? What happened after that?
Yeah, so at least in like the U.S., like the expectation is once you graduate high school, you go straight to college. And there's a handful of individuals that I think make the right decision of having some sort of gap in between to really determine what you want to do and what's best for you. Um, well, I wanted to kind of follow suit and do what everyone else was doing. So I still had an opportunity to sort of try out baseball and give that another run. So I went straight from high school to college. And when I went to college, I I always tell people that like I was there for like 2 weeks. I was there for about a quarter, and everything was educational. I was doing great with the grades, like for lack of better words, I was kicking ass in school.
Yeah.
Um, but what was holding me back was like the social exposure. Everyone was there. Like colleges where you make friends and you're this adult. and you're kind of out in the world alone without like your parents and your family, and you get to really be who you are as an individual. Well, that frightened me. Talking and communicating with my peers, I was terrible at it. At least in my perspective, it made me uncomfortable, and it was exhausting.
What was it about it that kind of like terrified you or kind of made you feel uneasy? What was it? What was kind of like going through your mind, or what was the driving force behind that fear?
I feel like um, I was kind of, like I didn't resonate with kind of their agendas. My agenda was still trying to stay healthy. My
Mm.
agenda was still trying to get back onto the baseball field and having that obsession. My agenda was trying to be focused and not be, you know, a um, a late teens, early 20s year old. Like that wasn't my priority. It wasn't my prerogative. Um, and I don't think that was, at least from my perspective, like that made me sort of an outcast, even though I wasn't. Like I was, once again, when I'm in a situation in which I need to communicate, I can turn it on. But I don't think people realize how taxing it was on my behalf.
Mm.
Um, and so it was a lot of insecurity. That's really what it was. A lot of insecurity, a lot of low self-esteem, just because my whole life I was kind of different because of, my back brace to my back surgeries. That I felt like I knew the story that was going on in my mind.
Mm.
But those who talked to me just thought I was just like this normal teenager, which I didn't feel like I was.
Mm.
So that was the obstacle I was experiencing. Um, and then I remember it got to a point I was in communication with my mother and telling her, how difficult it was. Um, and then eventually one day I called her up. I remember I was in a econ class and I stepped out of and it was just my mind was so chaotic. And I stepped out of the econ class and I called my mother on the university quad and I was just bawling. And I was like, hey, I
Mm.
need to come home. So I went home and I remember one of the first things she told me, she says, okay, you can be home, but you either need to work or you need to do some sort of schooling, like go to community college.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I worked as a teacher's aide, as you mentioned, while still trying to get in shape. Like once again, my mind was not willing to come to terms with I wasn't going to be an athlete anymore. Like that was still
Mm.
my identity, but I had to do the whole teacher's aide thing so I could still live at home.
Mm.
So I'm doing the teacher's aide thing. I actually started taking some night school classes, um, and I picked up a pitching coach. Started getting back to baseball, but I just wasn't as good as I was previously.
Mm.
Um, and that was hurting me. Like I was like weeks on weeks, I was working my butt off, and I was feeling this plateau, and I was really pushing myself, and then I came to terms with I'm like, I'm not the same baseball player as I was, and I will never be that player again.
Mm.
My back had a lot of restriction to what I was able to do. I was a pitcher in baseball, and so
Yeah.
it's all about having a very violent movement to throw the ball as fast as you can. Um, and my back I couldn't hold up to that. I couldn't do that on repetition, and that really brought me down again. Like the whole kind of like that depression set in because I was like, great, like everything that I had been aspiring for and working for my whole life, like that's gone. And coming to terms with that was extremely difficult. Um, and then, I continued taking more classes at the community college, continued working as a teacher's aide, and then I actually started working at the elementary school I went to growing up, and just trying to still stay in shape. I was like, I don't know what I want to do with this body, but eventually I want to do something with this
Yeah.
body. Um, and I tried. I was actually practicing with my community college basketball team, getting in shape, getting conditioned, lifting weights, trying to get strong again, not knowing what I'm going to do. Um, And eventually I was like, what? I need to do something completely different. I need to sort of recalibrate and do something that is uncomfortable and unfamiliar to me so I
Hmm.
can start off with like new habits.
Yeah.
Um,
So kind of like come out of your comfort zone, something you're used to. In essence, again, still competitive sports, but to yeah, to kind of like keep growing and see if there's another way around this. Is that right?
yeah, completely. I think individuals grow significantly when they expose themselves to that discomfort. And that was kind of my hypothesis. I'm like, the more uncomfortable I can be, uh, kind of the more I'm going to be able to bring out of myself.
Yeah.
Um, and I had kind of all this pent up frustration. Um, you know, I had been going through different bouts of depression, and I thought to myself, like I am, I mentioned to you in our previous call, but I'm like Wolverine. I have
Yeah.
all this
You got this
titanium.
adamantium like sort
Yeah,
of spine going
exactly.
on. You're
Yeah,
like built in.
yeah. I'm a beast. I'm like I've gone
Yeah.
through so much. Like nothing can stop me.
Mm.
And while I have my ebbs and flows, like I got this, and I've always appreciated the sweet science of boxing, um, and I was like, one on what? Like I've never done it competitively. I've never like really like gone into the gym and worked out. I was like, one on what? Like I'm gonna box. Like that's gonna
Mm.
be. I'm gonna focus my time and energy on boxing. Um, so I go in, I'm trying to think of like, how I should begin. And I go, I look up different boxing gyms online, and finally I find one that's kind of in like the downtown Oakland area, and it's like it feels like kind of like this Rocky esque boxing gym,
Yeah.
and turns out actually one of the boxing greats, his name's Andre Ward.
Mm.
Worked out there when he was a kid as well. And I was like, you know what? Like that's inspirational to me. Like that resonates. Like I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna learn how to box. I'm gonna be great. So I go in and I start working with a trainer. We're working out. I'm loving it. I'm just falling in love. Like the beauty of boxing, and I had this kind of like this misconception initially that you need to be angry. Boxing was so cathartic. You have to be patient. You have to almost be in this like meditative state to remain focused,
Mm.
and that was perfect for me at the time. While still being able to like let out the aggression I had, um, and it was just working. And I was going there every single day, getting my workouts in. I wasn't feeling that plateau because I had no exposure to it previously. I was just
Yeah.
able to push myself. And eventually, Andre Ward's trainer came in, and at this point, Andre Ward is just like he's everything. He's like the pound for pound champ. He's just the best boxer in the world, and his trainer comes in, and everyone's kind of gawking at him, and they Virgil Hunter,
Mm.
and no one's approaching him because he's Virgil Hunter.
Yeah.
Well, I'm this naive individual who really didn't know all too much about boxing before,
Yeah.
and one of my friends there, he was like, "Hey, that's Virgil Hunter." I was like, "Okay," and I'm thinking, okay, and like this is my first outbound exposure. Like so this is a
Tell him.
sales development podcast. This is me outbounding. I
Yeah.
walk up to Virgil and I say, "Hey, Virgil. Okay, I'm 20 years old. I've been an athlete my whole life. I'm giving this boxing thing a go around. And if, by the way, you can't tell, I'm like 6'7". So
Yeah.
I'm a pretty tall individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to be great. I'm like, how can I be great in boxing?
Mm.
And he looks at me and goes, He says, and he rattles off his number. Just says his number. I wish I had it in my mind right now, but
Mm.
honestly, I wouldn't expose him like that. No one can have his number.
Yeah.
But he rattles off his number. He goes, if you can remember that, give me a call after your workout and we'll talk. And like I'm blown away. I'm like, oh my goodness, I just got his number. Like this is the
Mm.
best pickup situation I've ever had in my life.
So you've gone up to the prospect, you've kind of
Yeah,
like pitched to him, he's given you his contact details, and he said, right, give me a call if you can remember this. You must have been over the moon, right?
I was over the moon. I was over the moon. Like I had done the like upfront contract and everything, right? Like I was doing BDR work before I knew his BDR work.
Love
And
it.
so I'm like, okay. So like the rest of my workout, I'm just like sort of rattling off this number. Everything I was doing, I was on the heavy bag, rattling it off. I was shadow boxing, rattling it off.
Hmm.
Finally, after the workout, I'm driving home. I'm like, nah, I shouldn't call him. I'm like, he probably didn't mean that.
Oh.
Not neither here nor there. I go into the workout the next day. In the gym. I didn't call him. I'm in the gym, and this individual comes in, and I hadn't seen this individual at the gym before. He's kind of like looking around, and then finally he sees me and he approaches me. I'm like, who's this guy?
Yeah, yeah.
And he goes, hey, did you speak to Virgil the other day? And I was like, yeah, I did. He goes, and did he give you his number? And I said, yeah, he did. He goes, why didn't you call him? He told you to call him.
Oh
And
no.
I was like, I genuinely didn't know he meant for me to call him. And
Hmm.
like, that's like my low self-esteem speaking, right?
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
goes, no, you should have called him. He goes, now what's your number? So I give him my
Hmm.
number. He says, all right, he'll be in contact with you. He leaves the gym. I finish my workout. I'm like, what am I getting into? Finally, later on, full exposure, I'm at a therapy appointment. Okay. Got
Yeah,
to take care
yeah.
of that mental health. I'm at a
100%.
therapy, I'm with my therapist in the middle of my session. All of a sudden, because I had programmed Virgil's number into my phone, like
Hmm.
I wasn't going to lose his number. I just wasn't going to call him.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I see his name pop up. He's calling me now. I was like,
Your prospect's chasing you
yeah,
now, right?
yeah, you trying to book a meeting with me? I'm like, this is crazy. And so I tell my therapist, I'm like, hey, time out. Like, I got to pick this up. And she's like, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, pick it up, pick it up. So I pick up the phone and I'm like, hello? He goes, hey, is this Joshua? And I go, yeah. And he goes, hey, so you're going to come work out for me. Okay. I want you to come to my gym. It was,
Whoa.
yeah. So he had this like special gym, like only 8 boxers, and in each one of the boxers, like they're all professionals. Two of them were amateurs. One of them was a U.S. Olympian. Like this mecca of boxing, if you will.
Kind of like
Um,
the boxing elite in Virgil's place, right?
yeah, exactly. So this was his own. It's a stable because you're the thoroughbred horses, right?
Mm.
His stable was like 20 minutes out of Oakland, and he's like, "Hey, I want you to come to my gym tomorrow, and you're gonna work out for me." I was like, "Yeah, you got it." So the next day,
Boom.
I go to the gym and meet up with like his right hand man, and then Virgil shows up and he's just like, "Work out." Ultimately, we work out for the next like 4 hours. I'm just exhausted. It was a fantastic workout, and like I'm once again like I'm over the moon because I'm like, wow, like
Yeah.
my athletic career, like JB, you still have it. Like
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
the dream is still alive. And it was a great workout. And he goes, and after the workout, I'm like, hey, so like, what's the deal now? He goes, you're gonna keep coming back. He said, you're gonna keep working out, and he's like, you have a spot here now. And so I'm this
Sweet.
guy who was working out at this regular boxing gym now has this opportunity to work out with boxing greats, and that exposure was incredible for me. And like truthfully, I attribute that to like sort of gaining back, for lack of better words, my backbone.
Mm.
It gave me the discipline. It gave me kind of the courage to speak up and to take the leap of faith that was my exposure to boxing.
So just to kind of stop there, like what I'm envisioning right now is like going back to that back piece of like being Wolverine, like having the adamantine back, and then you're meeting Professor Xavier, who's saying, "Hey, come to my class. You're now one of us." That's kind of
Yeah,
like where you are right now, right? So as in back then, that's freaking cool, man. So kind of what happened next then?
yeah. So I was had a lot of exposure once again with these individuals who were just highly disciplined, and it felt like I was a part of a community that I could like sink my teeth into. Because as I mentioned, like I wasn't focused on being in my early 20s and kind of living up my life. I was focused on like being focused. Like that was what I really desired. I desired that sense of structure and being able to gather back my athletic identity, and that was what I was getting. Um,
Mm.
but then, actually, during one of my fights, I was actually sparring with this individual, And I went down, this is a story for the boxing fans out there. I went down for a body shot. Instead of dropping with my legs, I sort of bent my back over, and felt this pop. I had been
Ooh.
working out, I was in tip top condition. Um, and I felt this pop in my lower vertebrae, and it was excruciating pain.
Mm.
Excruciating pain. Went to my doctors, and they're like, "Hey, we can't clear you to box anymore. Um, I'm sorry." And the thing that the most upsetting part is when I was diving into boxing, I told myself that this was the last time I was going to really give myself to like that athletic exposure. I said, if
Yeah.
boxing doesn't work out, I need to stop. Um, and when my doctor said no more, it was like, goodness, like I'm not going to lie to myself, right? I need to
Mm.
stay true to the promise I made. Um, I need to stop. And so that was really hard. And once again, a very sobering experience for me, kind of something that like I felt like I kept reliving.
Yeah.
Um, and it was important for me to like literally hang up the gloves at that point. Um, so then I dedicated my full time to school at that point. I was like, you know what, I need to graduate. At this point, I'm not going to be in athletics. Like, I'm going to need to eventually get a job. And then my exposure being back being at school full time, um, I realized I was like, you know what, like this whole like social anxiety thing is probably something that like multiple. I'm not the only one experiencing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I went to one of my friends, and we were sort of just talking it over some like beers. And I was like, I think that there's a platform for this. Like universities don't have a platform for what we're experiencing, but we aren't alone. Social media is the icebreaker these days. Like if you aren't
Yeah.
on social media, you are kind of like SOL or like shit out of luck in terms
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
having a social life. And so we spent about 9 months to a year building this social engagement platform for universities called Open Circle.
Yeah.
We eventually were pitching it to a multitude of different universities. Eventually, actually got to the opportunity to pilot it at the university I went to, and it was like I was like, wow, like this is my first exposure to building something with like using my mind
Yeah. Yeah.
and kind of showing my like true intellect. It was just all it's pure passion. It wasn't anything that kind of like I was like I need to do this. This was just simply because I felt like it was the right thing to do. Like I was experiencing it. He also understood the kind of like the life of an introvert. Um, and it was really exciting pitching and building out this product, building out this MVP and pitching it to universities. Like at that point, like I was really BDRing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
reaching out to universities completely cold about a product that wasn't tried and true and was like
Startup life, right?
say that again. I'm sorry.
Like true startup life.
Yeah, exactly. And it was an absolute grind. I remember working with one of my family friends, Eric Sipple, and he was able to help me sort of navigate this period of my life and and build this platform and sort of think about how it could be integrated with universities. Like it was challenging, and it was actually something that like I was enjoying. Because I got the opportunity to show myself, to demonstrate to myself, like, hey, you aren't just an athlete, right?
Mm.
You are someone that that can
There's
hold
another
their own.
side to you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Because I didn't really school wasn't. I mean, like I wasn't bad at it, but it wasn't something that I was extremely passionate about.
Yeah.
And so eventually, I graduated from college, and um, the next step was like, okay, do we continue on with this startup? We weren't able to pay ourselves, um, or do we, sort of branch off, go into like more established startup life and get a better understanding on how like startups are really ran and like how companies are really handled. And ultimately, like I'm in my young 20s, like I want to go get paid.
Yeah.
So we part ways with that project, and I start interviewing, and that's ultimately when I had the privilege to interview with Addison at Conversica. And I remember like I was another instance in which I was like really over the moon to get that opportunity. It was my
Yeah.
first. I hadn't done internships at startups or anything corporate for that matter. Like I didn't get that exposure. I know tons of people do like the internship route, and like I didn't do that. I was doing sports. My internships were at a boxing gym,
Mm.
and learning from these professionals. So I knew I had discipline. I knew I had grit. I knew I had this hunger. And then from Open Circle, I knew I had like I had some type of exposure that I knew I could be a self starter, and that any
Yeah.
environment I was going to get thrown into, I was going to embrace. Um, and I interview at Conversica. Um, Addison, this is kind of a fun fact. You might not know this. So I had my commencement. So I had like the graduation ceremony
Yeah.
the week after my interview. So when they're interviewing me, they're like, "Oh, in you've graduated college." I told people I was like, "Oh, yeah, I was like, I'm doing commencement next week. I'm super excited."
Yeah.
And but not saying I actually graduated.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I still had some summer units I should take care of, and then I graduated. And I
Mm.
remember one of the HR women, once I got hired at Conversica, she's like, "Hey, so we sort of found that you haven't
Uh-oh.
graduated yet." And I was like, hey, I was like, time out. I said I've done commencement. I was like, I never explicitly said I graduated. I was like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
and at this point, I was like one week away from like actually graduating. I was like, hey, but I'll have my diploma in your hand next week. I promise you that. I lived up to that promise and everything. But like,
Good
I
man.
wanted the job, right? I needed the job. I wanted the job.
Mm.
And I, once again, like when I was at Conversica, Addison did a great job of really getting me prepared for like what was to come. And some advice that he gave me was like, hey, you want a rocket ship of a career, and to do that, like you want to make sure your trajectory is going up from the get go. Like, don't take time to dilly dally. Don't take time to sort of like settle in. Like, push yourself right away. Because if you do that, like the trajectory of your career is going to be what you want it to be. And that was
Yep.
like my goal. I was like, once I got that advice, I was like, I'm going to be hitting quota every single month. I'm going to be taking on more responsibility than most SDRs are given.
Mm.
And kind of the similar mindset I took to boxing, like I'm going to step out of my comfort zone. Like this
Yeah.
is definitely far out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to embrace this. And I'm going to push myself. So I, did a great job as an enterprise SDR at Conversica, and then eventually, like what I really wanted to do was get into sales development. I want to be a manager for sales development just because I was falling in love with it.
Yeah.
The process, the grind, and like we mentioned at the beginning of this, like the hype of it, right?
Yeah.
Every single day you have to be hyped. Um,
Definitely.
and and at this point, Addison was at Pantheon. I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, really want to be in sales development management. Can I earn that opportunity at Pantheon?" He said,
Mm.
"Hey, come on board here." He said, "Prove yourself, and then we can see if it works out." Eventually, I made the move to Pantheon. Great decision. I, did a good job there. Proved myself as an individual contributor, and then
Yeah.
have the privilege to move up to sales development management and building an outbound team, a real outbound engine here at Pantheon. And still, once again, stepping out of my comfort zone, right? Like
Mm.
this job pushes me on a day-to-day basis, but like the beauty of like building a good career is not being complacent, and it's sort of embracing the challenges that you're given, um, and and working out and trying to find solutions. And every single day, it's that reminder of kind of being in the gym, being on the baseball field. The same things I was able to do to push my body, like I'm doing that today to push my mind and sort of excel the team in the organization.
You finally got your field of dreams, my man, Joshua. That was a hella inspiration. There's so many pieces in that. And again, as I said at the beginning of the show, that's why normally we have SDRs, but your story reminds me of so many elements in your personal life that we, as SDRs, we go through in that. So like you're saying, going back to being in school where you're going through the motions with members around you and you feel like you don't fit in. You feel a bit different in a sense. And that's something a lot of SDRs can feel. You're going through where you've got these targets of this is what you want to do, this is where you want to be, but you're constantly hit with knockbacks, you know, like not only to your health, but to your mental health. And there's these elements where we feel like we're drowning and it gets us depressed, you know. But like you said, you were searching for, okay, so if this isn't fitting, what else can I do? What else can I try out? And you'd go through it and you think, okay, this is it, this is it. And I even thought that as well, like when I was wanting to be an SDR manager, an AE, and I'd always be hit with knockbacks in my career and it would get me down, you know, but like talking to other people and you're a fighter, you are literally that Wolverine, you're getting damaged, you're re-healing, then you have these multiple I'm sorry about the Marvel analogies here, I'm a big Marvel fan.
Hey, I'm good.
But you're kind of regenerating yourself, but you've got that fighter mentality in you of, do you know what, if this isn't going to happen, then I'm going to go try this. And I think that's some great advice to give to SDRs because, again, we sometimes need to give it 12 to 15 months before we can actually, you know, move on to the next bit. But you're going to be hit with hundreds of knockbacks, with objections, with prospects, with other staff members, and things that could either make you or literally like break you, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, you went through the whole experience of trying to launch a business yourself and going through those motions of pitching. You also, like with Virgil Hunter, you're cold calling. You went out to your prospect, you reached out to him. You didn't follow up. Look what happened. It did bring you. It brought you there. And like as you said, like I can definitely see why Addison took a bet on you, because you've got those innate qualities of somebody that goes and gets it. You know, you go up and get it. You're open to coaching and feedback, again, which is great traits for an SDR. I always get asked is, okay, they can definitely be a top performer, but are they coachable? Are they manageable? You know? But also, like, I don't know why I can't say this. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah, I'll say Conversica. I'll say it for you.
Thank you. But then you said you fell in love with sales development so much. Normal SDRs that come through, they want to go straight into the account executive closing position, but you then took the different path, which again, something I did as well, which is going into management, because you had that passion about the art of prospecting, you know, like hyping up these team members. And as you said, it is a challenge in itself to like motivate a team and hype them up. So again, if anybody's listening or watching this, there is more than one path. And you will go through trials and tribulations. But again, Joshua, like hats off to you for slugging it out and getting to where you are today, my man. And another interesting piece that really resonates with me is the whole introvert piece. So I can relate to that because outside of work, I'm somebody that enjoys music and I perform in music and I do a bit of rapping. And I remember I used to travel across Europe doing shows. But I was always the sort of person that I would be happy to just stay in my room. I don't want to talk to too many people after a day at work or a day at school or university, whatever. But when I have to turn it on to be a host, to be a performer, to be an SDR, to be a manager, I can turn it on. So I'm assuming some people think in order to be in sales, you have to be an extrovert. But there are talented introverts. What advice would you give to the introverts listening on kind of how can they take it to the next level but still feel comfortable about this?
Yeah, great question. And I'm also glad, you also mentioned that to me that, you yourself are an introvert as well. I think that my advice to introverts is, be curious. Find something about their job that intrigues you. And, I think that especially when you're working with other 20-somethings or 30-somethings that, you have tons of extroverts in a sales organization, but come to realize that, like, it might not always be the people or the product that gets you going and gets you out of bed to do the job, right? Sometimes it's, you find something in specific that you just really latch onto, and that's what gets you through the day. And especially for, like, the reps that are, 6 to 9 months in, and you feel like, you're hitting that plateau, and things are getting a bit beige, latching on to, creating new messaging, and just staying focused on like the betterment of yourself. That's what has helped me as an introvert. Because, I'm not always the individual to be attending the happy hours. And at times that can make me feel left out. That can make me feel like, man, like maybe I should go, but that's not really my comfort zone. That isn't kind of like what really gets me going. So what does is like just that constant desire to get better at a specific part of my craft. That's what's helped me as an introvert specifically.
Some solid advice, man. Like, I'm just thinking about the headline of this show already, like the guy who broke his back but had the biggest comeback. I friggin' love it, man. But as we're coming to the end of what is been, an inspirational show, and hopefully the guys that are watching and listening in, hopefully you're able to take something away from this. But as I ask every guest, if you were to give 3 bits of advice to a younger Joshua that might be about to embark on this career, or do you know they're in a completely different career and they're contemplating about getting into tech and sales development, what 3 bits of advice would you give them, Josh?
Okay, so I would have to say, and you haven't seen me drink at all during this podcast, but stay hydrated. For those who know me, like I drink a gallon of water a day. I have found that staying hydrated not only makes you feel great, but it gives you that healthy edge. And it also, it makes for a clear mind. And like, staying hydrated is going to lead to other great things that you do for yourself, your body, and your mind. But that's kind of just like the foundation. If you can get hydration taken care of, you're going to start eating a little bit healthier. You might start going to bed at a better time. You might start, working out a little bit. Doing things for your body and your mind enables you to have a competitive edge at work. And I know that might sound strange, but staying hydrated is thoroughly important. I will always push hydration. And then, a positive attitude goes a long way. This job is going to test your patience, and it's going to test your ability to be kind to yourself. Being able to keep positive and be kind to yourself, and not have that negative narrator in the back of your mind, that also gives you a competitive edge, because it is so easy to get down on yourself, especially once again, like the SDRs that have been in the role for a year, or the SDRs that, have might have missed quota during a month or a quarter. Being able to still keep a positive mindset and drive yourself, it goes a long ways, and sort of develop that habit, that routine, as early as possible, so you don't build those bad habits of negativity, because it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole.
Agreed.
I would also say this was some advice that I remember a VP of sales gave me. I was crushing it. I remember it was one of my best months ever at Conversica, and he pulled me aside and he goes, "Hey Joshua, you've been pumping the brakes lately." I was like, pumping the brakes? Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm the top of the leaderboard. You can't tell me I'm pumping the brakes. And he goes, well, just because you're at the top of the leaderboard, does that mean you're giving it your all? And I thought to myself, well, maybe I could probably be a bit higher. Like at that point, it was like halfway through the month. I was already at 100% to quota. And I thought to myself, well, maybe if I was giving it my all, I could be at 150% of my quota at this point. And time being, when he was sort of talking to me, I convinced him. Actually, I don't think I convinced him at all, but I told him that I was giving it my all. And then I took some time to introspect. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not giving it my all. Like, I can be expecting more from myself. So, like, I guess ultimately my advice is, if you think you're giving it your all, like, be honest with yourself. Like, be as transparent as possible. And sometimes that's sobering. Like, sometimes you don't want to admit to yourself that you are not giving it your all. But when you do have those instances in which you're, giving it 100%, you'll find magic. And you'll realize that you can achieve so much more than you believe and than you set out to. So be as transparent as possible with yourself. Don't lie to yourself and say you're giving it 100% if you're really giving it 75%, because you're cheating yourself on an extra 25 that you want to see, your company wants to see, everyone who's supporting you wants to see that extra 25 come out. So be transparent with yourself.
Hell yeah. You brought the hype, Joshua. You brought the hype as per your LinkedIn tagline. Now I see why. So thank you for that. And before we end, are there any shout outs that you'd like to give out?
Tons of shout outs. So obviously, Addison Lee, thank you so much for introducing and connecting Neil and I. This
100%.
is a
Big
huge
up,
opportunity for me. You've given me a massive opportunity just in the corporate world. You're my Virgil Hunter of corporate America. So thank you, Addison.
I love it.
Obviously got to shout out my mother. Like, I would put her first, but this is a sales development podcast. So I figured, mother,
thanks, Mom.
My father, my brother, my sister, my girlfriend, my dog, all these individuals that, sort of are my backbone, right? I have a few spine, but I still do need that extra hand, sort of holding me up. And those are the individuals that like really hold me down and keep me grounded. So I appreciate you all very much. And, Conversica and Pantheon for giving me an opportunity. I still see myself as an athlete. I still am obsessed with working out. I'm still, if I have an opportunity, if someone called me up and said, hey, JB, you want to come pitch for our Major League Baseball team? Oh, I'm doing that. I'm taking that opportunity right away. But time being, everyone who's taken a gamble on me and really let me show my true colors, thank you. So those are my shout outs.
Thank you so much. And if there is anybody out there who's listening or watching this podcast and they want to get in touch with you to kind of get some 2 cents or, just get some hype into their life, what's the best way to connect with you, Joshua?
Go to my LinkedIn, Joshua Brown. You'll see me. My tag is Sales Development Manager and Hype Man. So look for this face. Also, I would put out my phone number, but I feel like I get a ton of cold calls, so I'm not going to do that. You won't get my phone number today.
That's fine.
Time being, you can reach me at Joshua, Joshua, Brown, BROWN, at pantheon.io. But if you're listening to this podcast in 5 years, I might be somewhere else, but who knows? I love Pantheon, so I very well could still be at Pantheon right now.
You never know. But I'll make sure that within the show notes, guys, watchers and listeners, that I'll put in Joshua's LinkedIn so you can connect with him. Definitely highly recommend it. Seen some updates from yourself so far, sir. And again, it would be great to get you back on the show later down the line. An idea that I'm currently toying with is to have a dynamic duo. So maybe get you and Addison back in, or maybe you with one of your SDRs. I'd love to kind of do a dynamic duo with the manager and the SDR, so that could be a cool idea.
Don't tempt me with a good time.
I'm tempting. I'm planting the seed. This is me outbounding. But Joshua, you've been an absolute fabulous guest. Thank you so much for your time. Definitely want to have you back on as a future guest. But I wish you all the best success for 21. And most importantly, my man, happy selling.
Thank you very much, Neil. And yes, to all the listeners out there, happy selling. Thank you.